Hello, carbon-based listeners and silicon-powered friends. Welcome to Mastering the Machine, the podcast where humans and automation collide in perfect harmony. I'm your host, Frank Lamb, and whether you're flesh and blood or circuits and code, we're here to explore industrial automation together. From factory floors to digital cores, we're exploring how machines are reshaping our world, one algorithm at a time. So plug in, power up, and let's master the machine together. My guest today is Nikki Gonzales, Director of Business Development for Wintech USA and co-founder of the Automation Ladies podcast and OT SCADACon, which is an educational and networking conference for professionals in industrial automation. On August 18th, 2025, only 2 days after this podcast was recorded, Nikki suffered the unexpected tragic loss of her husband, Nathan Gonzales. You can help Nikki by donating to Meal Train or GoFundMe at the link shown in the show notes.
Hi.
Nikki, how you doing?
All right. I'm good.
My first question is, what was I looked at your profile and I saw that you went to like business school and did some language stuff, but how did you get started in automation? And other than, I know you went to Keyence training, right?
Yep.
What was your first automation training?
That was it. So on-the-job training with Keyence. So I'll back up a little bit. My dad's an electrical engineer, and he's done embedded controls most of his career. And when we moved here to the US because he is one of those engineers that can talk about what he does and teach very well. And he ended up sort of accidentally doing sales as one of the members of the team that could do that sort of thing. And he worked on some international projects when we lived in Iceland, which is where I'm originally from. And he got, I guess, got in with a British company that wanted to hire him through some of these group projects that they were doing for EU, or this was a different European commission at the time, but for fisheries safety, they were tracking boats and fishermen and doing emergency stuff. He was also involved with like telecommunications. And so he worked for this British company that had a branch in Houston. And my dad wanted to move to America, so he joined this British company with the idea that they would eventually transfer him to the Houston branch. And so he became a marketing manager for a survey division of a technical company as an electrical engineer, and moved our family to Houston when I was in middle school. And at that point, unfortunately, that company decided to shut down that division about maybe 2 years after we moved here. And they gave him the option to move back to Europe, or, he was going to be on his own. And he decided he didn't want to move back. We had settled here, we bought a house. My sister and I were going to school. And so he started his own business, doing tracking and communications for fleets of trucks and other things. They called it mobile resource management back in the day. And he sort of being a full stack engineer, came up with his own hardware for satellite and GPRS communication to be able to capture where the truck was going, even in dead spots where you have no cell signal, or out on the sea with boats. And then developed a cloud application to track the trucks and be able to bound where they are and develop fuel calculations and things like that. And it came with a little HMI type screen, a touch screen in the cab for the truck driver to be able to fill out logs and send emergency reports and calculate their fuel and all kinds of things like that. And so by the time I was in middle school, I started working at my dad's company as an intern. And I started out doing user manuals and technical writing. And so I wrote the first data sheets, user manuals, sales brochures for his products, which included third-party hardware like the satellite receiver, as well as his own developed controller, and then the screens. And basically I documented the HMI, or the in-cab display, was the first thing that I did a user manual for. So every button I would create, this is, you press this button and you do this, and this is what that does. And I worked there every summer, every spring break, until I graduated college. And I got really lucky because I got to almost participate in any part of the business that I was interested in. So I did accounting, I did some sales, I answered the phone, I did cleaning, I made the coffee, you name it. I got to kind of see what was going on in the business. And I really saw my dad more as a business person at this point. He was the CEO. He tried to hire more technical people to do the technology, but I know that was hard for him because he's more of a CTO type than a CEO, honestly. But at the time I saw that, and I got to go on a business trip with my dad to Boston when I was probably middle school or high school. And I really thought that was cool to be able to travel and meet people. And I went to like a business lunch and a dinner. And I was like, this is cool. You get to meet people and talk to them and you're solving their problems. And I also did some sales, more like pre-sales. I did research. I would look for fleet managers of trucking companies. I would call, make sure that they were still the right contact. And then I would mail them a brochure and a letter, and then hand those leads off to the salespeople at my dad's company. And one time, one of these leads called in, and the sales guy wasn't there, and I picked up the phone, and they said, hey, just run with it and hand it off to sales when you need help. Well, I didn't need any help, and I ended up closing that. Actually, remotely from a hotel room during a trucking trade show in Dallas, I ran a web demo where we were both logged into the website, but we were on the phone because we didn't have like Zoom back then. And the customer was in Washington State, a rural area where they didn't have good reception. And yeah, I closed that sale, and the customer was really happy with the whole process. The system solved a lot of problems for them. And I remember they wrote my dad an email, and they didn't know that it was my dad because we have different last names. And just thanking him for, and particularly mentioning that they had a really good experience with me as the salesperson. And that made me think that technical sales maybe was a thing that I was good at, because I went to business school kind of looking at my dad as the CEO, but I never figured out what kind of business I wanted to do. I got an international business degree. So like you mentioned, languages. I originally wanted to study abroad in Spain because I missed Europe. I wanted to go home, but Spain was it was out of my budget. And the way that international business programs work is you have to minor in a language, and then you have to study abroad in a country that speaks that language. And so with my Spain dreams dashed and out of my budget, I ended up in Monterrey, Mexico, which is a very industrial city. And I went to Monterrey Tech for a semester. And I actually went to a Coors brewery down there. And that was my first factory tour. And my first, high-speed canning line experience. And then when I was looking for jobs, I've never really known what I wanted to do. I enjoyed the process of solving somebody's technical problem, but I thought that engineering was too, like, you sit in a corner and do something by yourself all day. That's kind of how I thought of engineering, which is why I didn't pursue an engineering degree. Also, I took AP Physics in high school, and I had to work really hard. And other things come more naturally to me, like writing English papers and stuff like that. So I got that business degree, but then I realized that there are jobs that are technical but don't require that technical degree, and I can utilize my people skills. And I'd actually kind of forcibly learned those people skills by taking theater. I took a modeling class because I was shy when I first moved here, and I wanted to try to be more outgoing. And so I made an effort to do things that forced me out of my comfort zone to try to become more confident and more outgoing. My dad actually also told me about an example. He said there were not very many women in his engineering program when he went to college, but there was one woman that he remembers, and she was both really smart and she carried herself very well, and she was confident. And he said that if he kind of supported my efforts in doing things to get myself confident, like going to the modeling school, because he was like, yeah, so if you can, be like her and be really competent and confident, I think that'll help you, in your future endeavors. So yeah, I'm sorry, I'm very long-winded, but when I looked for jobs that were open, that were technical in some way, but didn't require an engineering degree, I saw technical sales, technical marketing, and technical recruiting. And Keyence was the only one that actually had me do anything hands-on technical during the interview process. And they showed, they basically, at the time at least, they didn't require an engineering degree. They just required any bachelor's degree. And then they give you like a lot of engineering aptitude tests and things like that in the pre-interview process. And then make you actually demo their products during the interview to kind of see if you can pick up on how to figure out an application and showcase, features and benefits of a technical solution. And then, yeah, that's really where I started. And the way that they interviewed back then was you join the company, and then during on-the-job training, they figure out kind of what division of their technologies you're a good fit for. And I ended up in machine vision, which was the most complicated of all the technologies that they do sell, which is probably why I loved it, because it's very challenging. And you had to kind of reinvent the wheel for every application almost by testing so many different variables. And that kind of problem solving just really appeals to me.
Yeah, and Keyence really does have, from the very simple, right, just the photo eyes and things like
Yeah.
that, all the way up to all the measurement tools and, of course, machine vision. And in my opinion, Keyence is one of the easier machine visions because plug in your keyboard, plug in your monitor. There's not the spreadsheet programming of Cognex or any of that stuff. But yes, and Keyence is also, for those listening, notorious for a little bit of turnover, right? But
Yes.
so many people go through their program. It's the starting point for a lot of people getting out of college, and they learn a few products really, really well, and then sometimes make their way into other specialties, maybe specializing on machine vision or photo eyes or whatever. But yeah.
So I worked at Keyence for a good tenure for Keyence, about 3.5 years.
That's long.
Yeah. And then honestly, they did tell me during the interview process that they are very micromanaged. It is just how they do things. And they were like, this may not be a place for you because we will tell you exactly what to do all the time, very specific metrics. And it's not just performance based. It is very much you follow our process exactly to the T. And I had worked very independently at my, internship job, but I got a lot of different experience during that. And they actually asked me a question during the interview that I answered wrong, because they asked if I would rather have a professor that gives you lots of milestones and tests and quizzes, or one that gives you a big project due at the end of the semester and you can manage your own time. And I said, I'm used to managing my own time. But then they described their culture, and I thought, well, I like a challenge. So let me try that and see if I like that. I found out I can do it. I also found out I don't like that, right? So it was not my favorite way of working, where I felt like I feel like I like to go for a larger mission, and then whatever needs to be done at the time to fulfill that larger mission, rather than tiny details like how many minutes did you spend on the phone today? And then that really would make people make long phone calls just for the sake of long phone calls. And, but I learned a lot. I was lucky to have a territory in the San Francisco Bay Area that was everything from traditional manufacturing out in the Valley to R&D applications in Silicon Valley, right? So solar cell R&D manufacturing, which was pretty new at the time, semiconductor, all kinds of high-tech stuff. And then also, chicken processing and blow molding and whatever, you can think of, electronics for automotive. And so I got to see the insides of all kinds of factories. I got to, program vision systems for lots of things. But I also have realized this, now later on in my life, that I have this personality of wanting to try different things all the time. And so once I get really proficient at something and I start to do something repetitively, I get bored. Vision systems kept me very interested, though, because they kept coming out with new technology. It was kind of early on in that industry. But I wanted to try a different type of culture. And so Festo has a really good reputation for being a good company to work for. And having been at the inspection stage of a production line all of the time, and being a very curious person, I couldn't help but think, okay, I got to trigger a pneumatic blow this product off the line, or we're going to gate it off, So I was kind of looking at, okay, what's the logic before and after? And so it was very cool for me to get to learn motion control and pneumatics. And that's really what I focused on at Festo. I was a sales engineer for their very large, product line, but they also had some code assist controllers for, motion control. And so got involved in a little bit of PLC type stuff. And I was there for a couple of years. I honestly would have loved to stay longer, but they were having delivery issues. They had supply chain problems. They had cut capacity during a recession, and then demand soared, and they didn't have capacity to fulfill all their orders on time. And this was a little bit of when COVID came around, I was like, okay, I've been there, done that. Like, this is rough. I really believed in the products I was selling, but I didn't necessarily believe that my customer would get them on time. So I was spending more than 50% of my time firefighting supply chain issues. And I'm just a person that I have a hard time sleeping at night if my customer is not happy. And when you have what we do in this industry, which is critical applications, you've got, time sensitive things, you've got complicated, not only do you have a lot of technical considerations when speccing and selling, components and a bill of materials to someone, but if you add on top of that you may not get the products, it was too stressful for me. And I got an opportunity to go into software sales. And being in the Bay Area, also, it's a very high cost of living place. And making enough money in industrial automation, I saw that to be a challenge to be able to live there long term or have any kind of quality of life that I wanted to grow, like buy a house or anything like that. So I got lucky to have an incompetent recruiter call me that didn't know the difference between electromechanical and electromagnetic. And he told me about a position selling electromagnetic simulation software to engineers that are designing electronics, including things like actuators and motors. They had modules for different frequencies and different types of design and simulation. And I said to the recruiter, I said, I have no idea what you're talking about, but it looks very cool. And if you want to tell this company that I know how to problem solve, I'm a very quick learner. I know how to sell to engineers, which is really just problem solve with them. And then they were a very engineering heavy company. They were from Germany. And so all their sales and marketing people were also engineers, and they took a chance on me. And I was very lucky to have a software company be willing to hire someone like me. But I had a really, really great time getting to work with people designing cell phones, routers, motors, ICs. I mean, all kinds of, you name it, the stuff being developed in the Bay Area. Now I was working with PhDs doing electromagnetic compatibility simulations and designs and electrostatic discharge designs to check if you plug something in, does it fry the chip? Or where do we place the antenna on this device so that it gets better coverage, with smaller component sizes, or optimizing designs for component cost and performance. And so I did that for a few years until we did so well that we got a middle manager that sort of got inserted into my organization. And he was not very technical, and he didn't care about the technical aspects of the sale. And he wanted me to close big deals and go golfing. Or he wanted to go golfing. And it really I realized that I'm not a salesperson that sells for the sale or for the money. I sell for the thrill of solving a problem. And once that was not really, the goal of my work anymore, I stopped enjoying it. So I actually left that job in a way that I would not recommend to people, which is I didn't really have another job lined up. But having lived in the Bay Area now at this point for about 10 years, or a little less maybe, I also kind of, got the little bit of a startup bug, right? I'm driving by billboards for Salesforce and HubSpot and, cloud this and cloud that and data and, segment with your data. And I had been using like a 5-year-old outdated, non-supported Microsoft CRM at my company. And I developed this series of pre-sales workshops to help people get a glimpse of how the software works and be able to test out and walk through an application example that was relevant to them. And we had these different modules of the software. So if you were developing low frequency applications like motors, you would want to come to a class that taught a motor example, not an antenna example, which is not exactly relevant to you. But this CRM would not allow me to find out which customers used what technologies, or, send an email blast to the right people. And I just thought that's a limitation that I, as a salesperson, have a hard time living with. And because I don't want to blast an invite to a bunch of people that's not relevant, right? And I know it's possible to know the right thing and send the right thing. So I went on a website called AngelList at the time.
Yep.
And I just said, hey, I'm this person with technical sales background. I want to work for a startup of any kind. I just want to learn what you're doing and try new tools. And I ended up working, I think I ended up with 8 clients where I was just doing some contract consulting work. I did some sales for a hardware company making safety devices for college students. I worked at a software company that didn't make any money yet for equity that was developing a software for analyzing test results from ESD testing equipment. I did marketing consulting, and I ran similar events for a distributor that I used to work with at Festo, and I redesigned their logo for them. And it was, a random assortment of things that either came up from my listing on AngelList or people that just already knew me and said, hey, will will you come work for us? And I said, I'm not looking for, full-time work in that way, but I was trying to find a good fit. And I ended up getting 2 job offers at the same time, one for the hardware company and one for an AI software company that was building predictive supply chain solutions. And having had the experience I had at Festo, I immediately was like, oh, you're saying that you can tell a company how much demand they're going to have for individual things in certain locations and they can plan their production around that? Yes. I was like, I see a ton of value in that. And then AI was just new and interesting to me at the time. So I worked for this startup remotely out of Detroit called Algo, doing supply chain analytics and forecasting. And at the time, it was pretty new to be able to take like third-party data, like Twitter sentiment and reviews from the internet and weather data, and use that to model conditions that may affect your business. And so I ended up doing a lot of technical implementations and proof of concepts for large companies wanting to use AI to improve their supply chain operations. And when I got hired, they were like, yeah, we work with industrial manufacturers and we have a great solution for them. But ultimately, I ended up actually spending most of my time with movie studios in Hollywood, predicting demand for movies before they get released on DVD. So they would know which stores would sell out immediately and which ones it would just sit on the shelf and have to be shipped back to them at the end of the promotional period. Like I said, I've had kind of random cross-functional experience. And that job I absolutely loved. And I was starting to speak at conferences about the technology that we were building. We had some advisors from MIT that were doing research in what's called operations research and doing machine learning and things like that. And so I got to present at big data conferences and AI conferences about these use cases that we were able to work with. And that's when my water broke very early. I had no travel in the 3rd trimester of my pregnancy, so I was doing local conferences only. But I was at one of these conferences thinking I had quite a bit of time left before I had to go on maternity leave. And my daughter decided she was not waiting any longer. So as I was at this conference, had to duck out before my talk. I had actually just gotten off the stage about half an hour earlier from a panel discussion. And that actually, because I wasn't able to go back to work when I expected, I didn't really have much maternity leave planned, but my daughter being premature, I realized that I could not go back to the type of work schedule that I had before, even though my husband was planning on staying at home with the baby. I left the industry, like the tech industry in general, completely at that point, wanting to spend more time with my family. And so my husband and I started a real estate business, and then we bought a vending machine business because we wanted to do something that could be flexible and on our own schedule. And we moved to Seattle. We had very interesting and unfortunate experience there being we built a business, bought a business, finally got profitable, and then COVID shut them down. And that's actually when Roman, the CEO of Copium, ended up reaching out to me. And I had talked to him before. I knew of what he was trying to build this kind of on the side when he was working at Apple. But I knew him from my days at Festo before. He was an engineering manager of the machine building group at Festo, where like they do sub-assemblies for OEMs and things like that. They call it customer solutions. Similar to, I think, what Sandro works with.
Yes, yep.
So he was like, there's not very many people that I know that know industrial automation, that know how to work with machine builders, that know how to do software development and startups and fundraising and, all that jazz. And so every time I made one of these weird moves, people would be like, what are you doing? That's not related to what you do now. And I'm like, but I want to learn. And then finally, it's like, okay, actually, there's something where all of these weird skills come together and is valuable. And then at that time, too, when I came back into the industry, I saw, there's robotics companies using AI now, and so it's been a bit of a twisty, windy road. But I joined Copium as the first employee before they really had a product, before they really had a platform, helped them build something, and we got funding. But similarly, just market conditions changed a lot during the time that we were building. They ended up pivoting to providing e-commerce solutions for distributors, because making a smart digital supply chain isn't really possible when, half the players are on paper. And so, it became a series of, which problems do we need to solve to get to the end solution that we really want? And similar to kind of now that I know this about myself, I had told them when I joined, I was like, you probably got about 3 years in me of commitment before I might get bored and need to do something else. So I stayed with them for about 3.5 years, and I knew it about right around the 3-year mark. And I even told my CEO that I think maybe I'm getting to that point where like, it's not the greatest fit anymore. And so last year I ended up leaving Quotebeam, and during one of the events, though, that I go to with Quotebeam, the AHTD Association for High Tech Distribution, I got to know Wintech, the manufacturer of HMIs, and they really impressed me with their small but really, really passionate team. They hire unconventionally. They really care about their people. They're not, growth at all costs kind of a company. They have a very small product line. It's very clear what they sell. They've been in the market for a really long time. And with, I went from, like I said, my water breaking at a conference to all of a sudden my kids are 5 and 7. The last few years have just gone by like that. And so now I want to take a chapter where I get to spend a little bit more time with my family.
Before we dive back into today's episode, let me tell you about the team behind Mastering the Machine. When your manufacturing operation needs to level up its automation game, there's one name you need to know: Automation Consulting, LLC. Whether you're integrating new systems, training your workforce, or need expert consulting on industrial automation challenges, we speak both human and machine language fluently. From PLC programming to process optimization, we help manufacturing companies bridge the gap between what is and what's possible. We also host the ultimate training platform for automation professionals. At the Automation Academy, we've created your complete automation learning ecosystem. Our subscription-based training platform gives you unlimited access to comprehensive video courses on systems integration, PLCs, and HMIs. Download technical documents, software tools, and resources that you can actually use in the field. Plus, get personalized job aptitude assistance to advance your career in industrial automation. But here's the best part: connect with fellow automation professionals on IO Central, our exclusive social media platform where the automation community shares knowledge, solves problems, and builds the future together. Whether you're a seasoned engineer or just starting your automation journey, everything you need is at www.automationllc.com. That's automationllc.com. Join the subscription platform where automation expertise meets community. Now back to today's episode.
But I guess actually back to your question, which was about Automation Ladies. Yeah, I started that when I was with Quotebeam because that's really when, after COVID or during COVID, I feel like our industry came more online because we had to. We had to start networking on LinkedIn instead of at trade shows because there was no trade shows. We had to start putting out content about the solutions we sell because customers wouldn't take your sales call, right? And so that really kind of changed things. And that's where I met Allie. I saw her content from Pack Expo. And I hadn't been to Pack Expo in a few years. And having been in software, I was like, I miss hearing pneumatics and motors. And and yeah, so that's where we started the show. And that's really grown to a lot more things than just a podcast.
Did you meet Allie when you were in Seattle or afterward?
Afterward, actually.
Okay.
So we did overlap a little bit, unbeknownst to both of us. We lived fairly close to each other. But I did not meet her until after I left and moved back to Texas.
Okay. And for those listening, Automation Ladies are primarily Nikki, Allie, Alicia Gilpin, or Allie G, and Courtney Fernandez, but there are a lot of other ladies involved. But I think those three do most of the podcasts or the webinars. So
Allie and I were kind of the original co-hosts. I asked her if she would start a podcast with me. She graciously said yes. And then I proceeded to realize that podcasting is harder than I thought. Because I had told her all you have to do is show up and just talk to me on these episodes. And then Courtney was one of the people the reason that Courtney got involved, she had actually started a Zoom call on Saturdays for women that are into robots. And it was kind of like, hey, bring your whatever. If you got your kids with you or whatever, let's just get on a Zoom call and talk about what we do. Because we just typically, having worked in the industry, you're one of a handful or less of women in your plant, your office, you're at your customer, whatever. Usually alone. And if there are other women, it's, oftentimes support or marketing roles or customer service. I had not preferred to go to women type events. I had been to a women in engineering, like an IEEE conference, and both I found the women to be pretty hostile. And two, I just found the programming to be very fluffy and, a lot of coaches and, stuff that I just wasn't interested in. And I really found what I thought I was looking for at that conference just with these girls that I found on LinkedIn, or women. So Allie talking about the stuff that she does. Courtney was like, hey, I have a UR robot in my garage and I can show it all to you if you want. And that was like, oh, actually, these are women that I enjoy talking to about tech, because they're not trying to coach me. They're not trying to tell me what I'm doing wrong or what I need to do when I grow up. We're just all here to kind of nerd out about the same stuff. And we happen to be women. And I was like, this is actually really cool. I didn't know that I was missing that. And Allie was talking about, I wish there were more women making technical content. So that's kind of why I thought maybe she would be interested in doing the show. And then later on, I was like, well, why didn't I ask Courtney to do the show? I don't know. I guess just Allie was kind of more, she had started some sort of group chat also and was trying to bring more women in. So later on, we told Courtney, we were like, hey, sorry, but like, do you want to be involved in this? And she's like, yeah, because she had been like, hey, can I help? Can I do stuff? Like, I want to help you guys. So later on, we brought her on as more of an official co-host. And then her husband, Albert, who's super supportive, and of course has to be supportive. She also has kids for her to be able to take the time to do anything, extracurricular. He's also an honorary automation lady and our IT guy. And so we've kind of, collected a few other people that like what we do or feel at home in some way. So it really, and Allie and I both said, like, let's do this. And then once some other girls that are younger than us or better than us, like, once we see enough women in our feed, we can stop. Like, it was never meant to be about us specifically, which is why we do interviews of mainly women. But we thought, let's try to tell the stories that we're not hearing on these other podcasts. So whether that's the, third shift maintenance technician, or in my case, I was like, what's a millwright? And I was like, I've never, realized that was a position in the plant. And I realized also that my focus has always been very narrow on automation and the area of automation I'm working with, whether that's a visual inspection or the motion control. I just don't know everything that goes on in a plant. And being a curious person, what's a better format than a podcast to get to learn from people? An excuse to talk to them about what they do and pick their brain.
Exactly. Machine building definitely involves a lot of that millwright kind of moving large systems into place kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And they do have some great stories. And there's some women in the millwright industry too that are
absolutely.
Absolutely.
There's women in all the trades.
Yeah, all the trades.
And we get to know some of them through LinkedIn as well. Mm-hmm. Electricians and just all kinds of other kind of positions. And we realize that we share some common problems and, some things that we wish were easier or better for us. And the other thing I wanted to point out too is, like, some people I think are afraid of changing jobs because they don't know if there's something better out there for them. If they're not well networked, they don't know, like, being in a sales position, I always met a lot of people. And you get a chance to talk to people at trade shows, you see other booths, you see other companies. But I think if you work in an environment like a plant or something, it's a lot harder for you to see what else is out there. So you may stay in a job situation that's not healthy or, not a good place for you because you don't know what else is out there. And so we also wanted to show people that, like, hey, here are all these stories of people doing different types of jobs that you could get into if they're adjacent to what you do with a little bit of extra training. Yeah. Or that there are tons of better companies out there that may be a better fit for you if you're working at a place that has a bad manager or, a toxic environment, or there's no women's bathroom on the floor and, that sort of stuff.
So would you say LinkedIn is definitely the premier method of networking and getting to know people, or are there other platforms that you use also?
No, LinkedIn is the only place that I know of, and I really am not a social media person. I have a Facebook account to catch, like, mostly to post stuff, keep in touch with my family back home. But I started using, so right when I graduated college, LinkedIn was new, and it was more of like a post your resume. And that's how I got my first recruiter calls when I was at Keyence, is people see on LinkedIn that you work at Keyence and they know it's a good training ground. And so I got these calls, and that's how I ended up with the job at Festo. That's how I ended up with the job at CST. And so I also thought, as a salesperson, that it was really helpful to be able to follow my customers if they change jobs. Because, you call someone and they're no longer there and you're like, oh, crap. They were really good customer, good connection. How do I know where they went next? Well, LinkedIn, if they're on there, you can see where they went. You can shoot them a message. So I had just kind of kept connected with people that I met in my career, not really for any purpose other than that. Kind of like, hey, this is my contact network. And it was all, local and stuff like that. But then by the time, I came kind of back to it, I had been off of LinkedIn. I had been out of the industry for 2 years. I saw people doing a lot more than it was just their resume, right? They're posting content, they're putting on webinars, they're putting on demos. And so that really seems to be the place. And I looked when I was at Quopium, I was like, where else do engineers hang out that I can find them and network with them? And there really isn't another place that I mean, there's some active Reddit forums like the PLC Reddit, but that's anonymous. So you don't know who those people are. Same thing with like PLC Talk or those sorts of places. So the only place that I know of where you can kind of be yourself, your personality, and represent your profession, your technical stuff, LinkedIn is the only place that I know of.
Yeah, and I was on it for a long time, but COVID changed everything. And all of a sudden, I couldn't travel anymore. And it's exactly the thing that you were talking about. And I didn't have my facility. My place was blown away by a tornado. So immediately, I didn't have a place to teach classes and I couldn't travel. Yeah. So immediately I had to pivot and go to LinkedIn and try to create some kind of a network there. And it's worked out really well. It's kind of your CRM to a degree, right? It's a lot of your customers on there and certainly your contacts. And another thing you mentioned is some of the trade shows like the AHTD. And I know I've seen you at Automate. Do you think overall, I mean, industrial trade shows, we used to have 4 of them in Tennessee every year, right? In all the big cities, we had a very big, the Industrials Shows of America, ISOA shows. 4 of them a year just in this state. And I imagine all the other states. And this was in the 90s and early 2000s. But do you think now, right, because of the cost of attending, and some trade shows are even charging to attend, are they worth attending? Or can you do most of your networking on LinkedIn?
I think they're absolutely worth attending, but I think for different reasons than they were in the past. My dad told me when I first mentioned to him Hannover Messe, right?
Yes.
It's a really big trade show in
huge.
Europe.
Yep.
And my dad, when he was an engineer in Iceland, would occasionally get to go to Hanover for a week. And that was really his main way of finding out about new technology and components that he could use in his systems. There really was not a whole lot of other, ways to get that kind of knowledge, up-to-date market knowledge of what's available and find solutions for what you're building and things like that. So he would travel, internationally. It was a whole deal. But now you can find all of that information on the internet. So why would you need to go to a trade show? Well, for one, I think engineers like to touch and feel things and kind of see them in action in some cases. And, it's definitely a huge concentration of things that you can see all at once versus having, try to call your local distributor out to come give you demos. Or maybe you got lucky and somebody has a, demo truck that is in your area, right? There's a lot of ways to kind of get that technical demonstration, or you can get all the product specs and, virtual demos online. So I think for the sake of discovering what's out there and finding what you can use in your designs, it's no longer necessary to go to a trade show for that, right? You can either do your own research on the internet, or, you can work with a number of your local distributors or even a company like Keyence. Like what I used to do is I would come and bring in an entire demo kit of my stuff and hope that, either this time or maybe next time, once you've seen everything I've got to offer, if you have an application that comes up, I can, test it and we can see if my product works and, that sort of thing. But I also thought about it from an economies of scale and, that sort of thing. That requires kind of one-to-one connections, right? You have to have one person call the other. They have to agree to a sales call. You have to arrange a time. And so there's just, if you think about the number of sales calls and customer interactions that are happening everywhere, it's like a little net with tons of holes in it everywhere, right? Not everybody's going to get to meet with every company. Not everybody's going to get to see everything. So I think there's, potentially added value in going to a big trade show every once in a while to just kind of get that real world. But it's at this point also kind of overwhelming just to walk a huge trade show floor. And like, can you even ingest the amount of information that's available to you there? So I wouldn't attend a trade show just for that. What I see really the value of a trade show nowadays is the in-person connections and reinforcing and or following up on information that you've already gathered yourself. So it may be an opportunity to meet a company that you've been researching online, but you don't have, a local office nearby, or they have equipment that is not easy for you to get your eyes on in person. But the other thing is strengthening relationships. So again, if you start a relationship with someone on LinkedIn, you have some common interests, you may, have a Zoom call. There's nothing that beats that in-person connection. And again, one-to-one, me flying out to see you for a 1-hour meeting is not a good use of our time and our money. But if we happen to be at the same trade show, us meeting for that same hour is now a whole different value proposition. So I think if people treat trade shows as both, continuations of existing activities and relationships, they can be extremely beneficial. But I've also been to trade shows. Like I did go to Pack Expo one year where it was just me. I went by myself. I wasn't in a buying cycle. I didn't have a need to buy anything. I was more so curious and wanted to make connections. And I really found myself walking a floor and looking at a bunch of booths and nobody being interested in talking to me. And I didn't make any connections. I didn't make any friends. I didn't find any value in that trip at all, really. And so I think it also very much depends on where you're at with things and what you're trying to do, whether or not, like at that stage, the trade show is going to be really valuable to you or not.
One of the things I was going to mention about the big trade shows like Pack Expo, you mentioned that. You can see some things that obviously, like a big Dematic storage and retrieval system, or really huge robots and a bunch of different types from a bunch of different companies. You can see very large things. That's one of the things that I got out of them. Speaking of trade shows, not exactly the same thing, but OT SCADACon, right?
Yeah.
Which is its own kind of networking and technical event that, of course, Automation Ladies started it, and we just had our second OT SCADACon this last month. And I was wondering, because it's grown quite a bit just in 1 year, and what do you think the future of OT SCADACon is going to hold? In other words, one of the things I thought, is there a such thing as too big, right? In other words,
there is.
Because it's all about networking, right? Everybody kind of got to meet everybody this time. Great networking size, but if you get too many people involved, there's going to be more of separate groups, and maybe not cliques, but people kind of staying in their own comfort zone, I suppose, rather than everybody meeting everybody. It was awesome this year. It was just...
Yeah, that's honestly something that we've thought about, and we still don't know what the answer is, because so the programming kind of topics are ones that Allie came up with, what she sees as different parts of kind of automation and integration. And she's like, I know a lot of these, but there's a lot of these I don't know very well. And I would love to learn more about them and show other people kind of like, she kind of calls it industrial automation speed dating of different topics. You get to know a little bit about it from somebody that does it, and it may spark your interest in becoming more proficient in that area or moving into it. But I think for the other benefit would be, you're not going to be the one doing it, but now you know some people that do it. And so if your customers or your partners, or even you're building a system or doing something that either integrates with that or needs that, you now have somebody in your network that is an expert or has experience with that area. So from a networking perspective, I think that's really powerful. The idea came to Allie after a couple things. We had been to ICC, the Ignition Community Conference. It's all about ignition, but it had a real it was more community feeling than a big trade show, because everybody there was, they of course use Ignition, but it felt very welcoming, and it was a smaller show also. And I thought, it would be really cool that, if my company one day had a community conference where people got together for this shared interest that they enjoy. And then we went to a technical training with Josh Varghese that was all about industrial networking. And the format was 2 days, and Josh was the only presenter, but he kind of broke it up into very digestible short sections. He's very entertaining. He's got a bit of a personality. And then that particular class was made because he typically does these on-site at factories for teams, but he had a lot of smaller customers or people in his network that were like, hey, I would love to get your training. But they didn't have, the budget to have him come in and deliver a training for them. So he thought, okay, I'll put on a training where people can come to me and all these smaller companies can send 1 or 2 people. And somebody started calling it Traceroute Con. And then, he brought in some food and had some fun raffle prizes. And Allie and I attended that first Traceroute Con. And again, Allie's observation, because there were a lot of business owners in that, integrators. And so we had a lot of great networking during the lunch, during the dinner. And we ended up going to karaoke, which is Caleb Travis, kind of initiated. And so we really got to know and network with and bond with a few people that we had, met already on LinkedIn, or we knew of their business. And she was like, the brain power in that room was just immense. And being able to network with them was such an added bonus to the training subject matter that we got from Josh. And then she was like, well, I would like to do something like that, but for, a broader set of topics. So she's autistic and she thinks in lists. And so she immediately got on her Traceroute notepad, wrote down a list of topics for OT SCADACon. And she's like, we're going to put on something in Houston that covers all of these different topics of automation. And I remember she was also like, but I can't be the only one talking the whole time. So she asked Caleb and a couple other people that were local to Texas if they would come help her teach these sections. And so when we first put it out, or she started putting it out, she put out the list of topics. And, here's a few people that are going to be teaching it. And of course, we got, Courtney to teach robots, Albert, her husband, to teach, SCADA virtualization, just people that we know that they would teach their subject matter, right? And then that's when people started coming to us and going, well, hey, I see a subject that I know, but there's no speaker for that. Can I be the teacher for that? And that's kind of how we ended up with this roster of like really cool, like 20 something people presenting each their different sections. And then of course we met you at, I believe it was Automate. And I'll be honest, I was intimidated by you at first because I had seen you on LinkedIn. I had seen, of course, you're a published author. You have a ton of experience. You have your own online community. You do your own online training. I thought that Frank Lamb is like way above our pay grade. I bet he wouldn't even talk to us. And then we ran into you and your wife, and it was such a pleasant surprise experience how cool you were and how down to earth you were, and the fact that you were actually willing to talk to us. And then the fact that you wanted to come to OT SCADACon. I mean, we're very blessed and lucky to have you as part of that. Teaching like literally the foundational first thing that you got to know about this stuff. Well, obviously you started last year with like discrete machinery. So your experience with machine building, of course, is like super relevant. But yeah, then it kind of grew from there. And which is why we call it a, community conference, because really, we couldn't have done it alone. And it probably would have turned out very differently if we had like 4 different presenters only for the 2 days.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything like this, as far as I know, anywhere. I know that the idea came maybe from Traceroute Con and the ICC and things like that, but to cover all these topics, and you said Allie made the list. She really hit it from the basics to the complex in that order. And I think people coming in, especially the people that I sat next to during the last OT SCADACon, were really, one of them was in sales, the other one was in SCADA, and they were both there to learn about topics that were, they knew the name, but they didn't know any details about it, and they got every bit of it out of that conference.
Having everyone in that room sit through every session, even though they may think, A, that session is way too basic for me, or B, it's not, close to the realm that I work in. I think there's a ton of benefit for them sitting through those sessions anyway, because part of the value proposition that Allie thought was, yeah, if you are a salesperson, A, you don't need to know how to do any of these things really. But if you're an expert in selling valves, for instance, you've probably been very well trained on valves, and you probably know how to, put together a bill of materials or size a valve for a customer, right? You're now kind of the expert resource on that particular thing. But you knowing how your valve is used, and what it fits into and what other considerations your customers have to worry about in their project lifecycle. All of those things make you a more well-rounded, more valuable resource to your customers. It also makes you more mobile in terms of in your career. If you did ever want to switch specialties, or you needed to find a new job, or you wanted to, like having that extra kind of knowledge about your industry, I think makes you a much more attractive job candidate to someone. But the other thing that I've learned really, especially right now, trying to get a job with just a resume and no connections is very hard, because we have all these AI resume screening systems, and we have thousands of people looking for jobs, and many of them overqualified. And I mean, when I graduated from college, it was also a recession, big time recession. And so I started my career with this idea that, at the time, a lot of people got laid off from their jobs that had had the same job for decades. And they were no longer really employable, because what do you do if you have 40 years of experience doing the exact same thing, and that's no longer an in-demand skill? So I kind of knew from the get-go of my career that you've got to keep learning constantly, because the next thing, what you do now may not be valuable by the time you need another job. And so I think in that sense, most of us in my circle have this, kind of insatiable hunger for constantly learning and upskilling. And doing that when you actually have some people to learn from, or people that you can call. And then once people see you and your hunger to learn, and your willingness to go the extra mile, which going to a conference is going the extra mile, like to begin with even. Those are also the people that might see in you. What I've been lucky in my career is people have seen in me the potential to do jobs that I would never apply for. I mean, if I had applied for a job as a business development manager and then a VP of sales for an enterprise AI solution and supply chain for retail suppliers, nobody would have hired me for that. I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. But the person that hired me for that, he saw me doing one thing, saw my skills that were transferable, and thought to himself, hey, this is a person that can do what I want them to do, right? And I think that's one of the things that's kind of also a risk about this newfound reality of like remote work and stuff, is if people don't get to see you do your stuff, then you kind of narrow your ability to be seen for your aptitude, your skills, not just your metrics, your hard metrics that go on your resume. So I think that networking is like more important than ever, because honestly, you can hire anyone from overseas for less money doing just typical hard skill stuff. With the connectivity that we have, with the online remote work, there's so many more options for employers. And with AI software getting more efficient at doing things, you need less people to do the same job as you did before. Then it becomes a lot more about what about you as a human, the unique qualities that you have together in what you know, who you know, how you work, how you go after things. Those are things you can't express on a resume, but you can express when people meet you and get to know you over a series of events, or someplace like an OT SCADACon, right?
Yep. And I think the endorsements that you get from coworkers and people that on LinkedIn that are networking with each other, in my opinion, all my sales, at least large system sales, have come from networking. It was never ads. It was always somebody who knew that I could do something, for them, a specific type of machine, or had been involved in a specific type of industry. And just reading that on a website is not enough. You really do need somebody that knows you to introduce you to somebody else that's in the industry. I really think networking's kind of everything now. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, unless you sell just a specific product with the hard set of specs that somebody may Google and look for and buy. If you're a person that's selling a service or something complex
or custom
somebody's
stuff, yeah.
ability to speak that, hey, this is the person or company that you can trust to accomplish this job. I think, you can't advertise that kind of thing.
So if people want to contact you, I've got, of course, linkedin.com/n/Nikki Gonzales, Nikki-Gonzales, and Automation
Gonzales
Ladies
with an S, which is very commonly misspelled with a Z, but
yes, Gonzales, and then automationladies.io.
So IO became popular before .ai for software and like technology companies.
Okay.
And then I thought, well, how fitting in our industry, IO means something different, but why not?
Absolutely.
Also, .com was taken, and I didn't want to pay for it. Somebody tried to like ransom us or sell it to us, and I said no, thank you. But automationladies.com actually is ours now as well. So.
Oh, okay. Well, that's useful. And
Yeah.
do you have any other websites or anywhere you want to point listeners to learn more about you or Automation Ladies or OT SCADACon?
Yeah, OT SCADACon does have a website. It's otscada.com. Not otscadacon.com. Somebody else also bought that, and that's a whole nother story. They're not trying to sell it to us, but again, I don't see the reason in paying lots of big bucks for a particular domain name. Again, it's, the people that find you, it's going to be by recommendation, not because they, punch the right thing into the browser or the Google. But no, I would say LinkedIn is definitely the easiest way to find me. I have several email addresses that I have a hard time keeping up with, and that is probably the easiest way, because I also love, in this remote world, most of the people I do business with are not necessarily local. And I really like about LinkedIn that I can get to know you a little bit just from like looking at, I get to see your picture, which makes me feel like I know you a little more. And then I get to see a little bit about your background or whatever, and vice versa. Like, you can check me out and see what I've done. And most people, though, don't click on the extra, like, you need to reveal the rest of my work history kind of part, because I have a lot of things that I do and have done. But yeah, I'd say find me on LinkedIn, and then you can go to otscada.com, or I think we have a link on the main Automation Ladies page also to the conference. And we should I think that'll be a hub for all the things that we do that's related to the Automation Ladies and stuff.
Yeah, and you guys present something at least once a week, it seems like.
Pretty much. So we have our audio podcast, which can be found on any major audio, podcast platform. Apple Podcasts is where I listen, but you can search for Automation Ladies there. And then what you'll hear there are episodes where we interview people in the industry about their different jobs that they do, how they got into it. That's the main question that we like to ask, is how the heck did you even find out about automation, and how did you get into it? Because I find that people's stories are so wildly different. And then because we are curious and we want to talk about like tech and see things, I thought the podcast format's not really great for that. I also don't want to have people listen to the podcast thinking they're going to get an interview and then they get some sort of, tech pitch. So we started a series of what we call live demos, demo days. We do LinkedIn demos that are live, and then they go on our YouTube page, but where we have either salespeople, sales engineers, founders of companies, anybody that's passionate about a technology, whether it's a software or a hardware product for our industry. We want them to come, A, talk about it. Why does it matter? What's the background? Who are they? Who's the company? And then B, show us a little bit of the thing. So it's not going to be a hardcore technical, fully comprehensive demo, but we do at least 30 minutes of show and tell of the thing. And it's really meant to be also like very friendly, open, because it's hard to get vendors to agree to do a thing live. Something is probably going to go wrong. We really make it kind of like, hey, our community likes to see stuff. We're going to be friendly. We're going to ask some questions. We're going to make some comments. It's not a place to come like grill people and be mean. But if you're curious, you like to see some stuff that you may or may not. I think for most things, like if you're, in this buying cycle of a particular technology, you're going to want to reach out to their salespeople and get your own demo and all that kind of stuff. But for a lot of us, it's like, we're not going to buy the thing, but we know somebody that might later on, or we're just curious. We, again, want to be that helpful person in our network that knows something that could be of use to our customer or our employer. Then getting to watch these demos in a super casual, relaxed way. You don't have to give your email address. You will not be added to any kind of spam list after you watch this webinar. Man, part of me doing that was actually because I hate how webinars, they oftentimes advertise that they're going to be really technical and give you a lot of good information. And then you sit through like 45 minutes of sales pitch, and you may or may not ever actually see the demo. So that's kind of, how we want to do things. If we're going to do them, it's probably because we are like, man, I feel like nobody's doing this thing that we want. And I'm just not a person to complain about things for too long before I either, decide to do something about it or figure out, okay, that's not my lane. I should stop complaining.
Well, it's been great talking to you. And again, for anybody who wants to make contact with Nikki, hit her up on LinkedIn or at Automation Ladies. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Frank.
Well, that's a wrap on this episode of Mastering the Machine. Whether you're headed back to the production line or entering sleep mode, remember, in the world of automation, we're all learning to speak the same language. Thanks for joining me today, both my human listeners and any AI overlords who might be tuning in. Until next time, keep your sensors sharp, your processes optimized, and your curiosity fully operational. This is Frank Lamb signing off. Stay automated, stay amazing.